"We need the deposit tonight, Miss Carter, or they won't be able to hold the bed." The words didn't echo in the hallway, but they landed heavy anyway, like a wet towel dropped on tile. Nia Carter stared at the clipboard in her hands, as if the paper could blink first. The hospital smelled like hand sanitizer and warm plastic, that sharp, clean scent that never quite felt clean. Somewhere behind a curtain, a monitor kept time with a steady beep, 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 patient, indifferent, almost polite. Dr. Samuel Reed stood with his badge turned outward, not trying to intimidate, not trying to soften it either. His voice was low, practiced, the kind of calm that comes from repeating the same hard sentence to different families every hour. Nia's fingers were still faintly rough with dried bleach from the morning, the skin around her nails pale and tight. She flexed her hand once, then steadied it against the clipboard. The number on the form looked unreal in the fluorescent light. $3,200 due before midnight. Not a fortune to the people who walked past in tailored coats, talking into phones like they were born with them. Not a fortune to the kind of man whose elevator opened straight into the sky. But to Nia, it was a wall. Behind the curtain, her mother's voice came out thin, the way candlelight looks when the air conditioner kicks on. "Nia, baby, you okay?" Loretta Carter tried to lift her head, then thought better of it. A clear tube rested under her nose, and her lips were dry, but her eyes still had that stubborn warmth, like she was more worried about her daughter than the pain in her own chest. Nia forced a small smile and stepped closer, careful not to trip on the cords like she'd done earlier, when her knees were shaking and she pretended it was nothing. She touched her mother's hand. Loretta's skin felt cool, and the hospital blanket scratched softly as she squeezed back. The beep continued, steady as a metronome, reminding Nia that time was not a feeling. It was a thing you could run out of. Nia swallowed and looked down at the pen clipped to the board. The pen was cheap, clear plastic, the kind that always seemed to stop working when you needed it most. She clicked it anyway and signed where the line told her to sign, her name curling across the page like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Dr. Reed shifted his weight, eyes kind but tired. "I can ask billing about a payment plan," he said, and Nia heard what he didn't say. "It still won't be fast enough." Nia nodded, because nodding was free. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, low battery warning, 10%, like even the device was tired of hoping. She stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall for one breath. Across from her, a vending machine hummed, stocked with things that looked edible but felt like cardboard. She opened her banking app and watched the number sit there, stubborn and small. A week of scrubbing baseboards. A week of being invisible. Her uniform was folded in her tote bag, black and crisp, the logo stitched in silver thread, Whitaker Residences. The last name looked like it belonged on a building, not on a tag near someone's ribcage. Nia's eyes stung, but she didn't let the tears fall. She could cry later, when her mother was safe, when the beep wasn't the loudest sound in her life. She slid the phone back into her pocket, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the exit. Outside, the evening air was damp, and the parking lot lights made the rain look like tiny needles of glass. Nia pulled her hoodie tight, tasted the metal of worry on her tongue, and whispered to herself, not a prayer exactly, more like a decision. Just get through tonight. If you want them to give, you have to look like you already do, Vanessa Pierce said, smoothing a crease that did not exist on the sleeve of her blazer. The boardroom on the 48th floor of Whitaker Tower was all glass and soft light, the kind that made every surface look expensive even when it was simply empty. Outside, rain drew thin lines down the windows, turning the city into a watercolor of headlights and neon. Inside, the air carried a faint scent of citrus polish and fresh coffee, and the carpet was so thick it swallowed footsteps like it was trained to keep secrets. Graham Whitaker stood near the window with his hands in his pockets, watching the traffic crawl below, as if the whole world was a schedule he could revise. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like a decision, and his cuff links caught the light with a small, cold flash. On the table behind him sat a spread of printed programs for the Whitaker Foundation Gala, each one embossed in silver, each one promising compassion with the confidence of a brand. A catering manager in white gloves adjusted a tray of sparkling water, and a junior assistant whispered into a headset, careful not to look directly at anyone important. "How many cameras tonight?" Graham asked without turning around. His voice was even, not unkind, just used to rooms that waited for him. Vanessa tapped her tablet and replied. 3 local outlets, 2 national streams, and the social media team is set for live clips. We have the step and repeat positioned so the donors will be framed with the skyline. She said skyline the way other people said salvation. Graham finally turned, his expression composed, the kind of face that newspapers loved because it could mean generosity or strategy, depending on the caption. And the Children's Hospital partnership? He asked. Vanessa's smile tightened at the corners. We will announce a new initiative, but you will not mention numbers. People respond better to vision than to accounting. She glanced toward the printed programs and added, the headline will be about hope. Hope sat on the paper like an ornament, bright and weightless. Graham picked up one of the programs and flipped it open. The pages smelled of ink and fresh-cut paper. Hope, he repeated, as if testing the word for quality. A soft chime sounded as the elevator doors opened, and 2 board members stepped out laughing, umbrellas still dripping onto the marble. They were already in gala mode, cheeks pink from the cold, voices warm with certainty. Graham, you are going to charm them tonight, one of them said, clapping his shoulder like they were equals. Graham offered a practice smile, the kind that never broke the surface tension. Vanessa leaned in just slightly, lowering her voice so only he could hear. Remember, you are not selling a donation. You are selling what it feels like to be the kind of person who donates. Graham's eyes flicked to the rain again. For a moment, the city lights looked like tiny heart monitors, blinking on and off without asking permission. He set the program down and reached for his phone, scrolling through a calendar stacked with meetings like bricks. The screen showed gala run time, photo call, keynote, private reception. It did not show the other kind of schedule, the kind measured in minutes and beeps. We have staff requests waiting, Vanessa said, as if reading a list of minor inconveniences. Housekeeping wants overtime approval for the residences. Security wants an additional detail. Someone from domestic services filed a note through the portal about an emergency advance. She said emergency advance the way someone said spilled coffee. Graham did not look up. Handle it, he said. Vanessa's relief was almost invisible, but it was there. Of course, she replied, already moving, already sealing the world back into categories, donors and staff, vision and accounting, tonight and not tonight. Graham slipped his phone into his pocket and straightened his tie, and the room adjusted around him like it had been holding its breath. Outside the window, the rain kept falling, steady and quiet, as if it knew something none of them had bothered to ask. Nia's bus hissed to a stop 2 blocks from Whitaker Tower, its doors folding open like tired hands. The rain had not let up. It clung to her eyelashes, soaked the cuffs of her hoodie, and turned the sidewalk into a slick mirror that caught every streetlight and bent it into gold. She kept her tote bag hugged to her side, the folded black uniform inside still faintly sharp with the smell of bleach, like work had followed her out of the apartment and refused to stay behind. Her phone vibrated again in her pocket, and when she pulled it out the screen glowed dimly, warning her that the battery was low as if it was scolding her for needing anything at all. A notification from the staff portal sat there, brief and polite in the way only rejection could be. Request received. Pending review. She knew what pending meant at this hour. It meant tomorrow. It meant never. She looked up at Whitaker Tower, its glass sides disappearing into fog and rain. Every floor lit like an aquarium where the important fish swam warm and dry. A doorman in a dark coat stood under an awning across the street, holding an umbrella for a couple stepping out of a car that cost more than Nia's entire year. The woman's heels clicked like punctuation. The man laughed into his phone like the world owed him a good time. Nia did not cross toward the main entrance. She turned down the side street instead, toward the service doors, where the air smelled like wet asphalt and the metal tang of a loading dock. The security camera above the door blinked red, watching her the way it watched everyone, but Nia had a badge and a name in the system. She swiped, and the door buzzed open with a reluctant sigh. Inside, the building air hit her like a clean blanket. Cooler, drier, scented with citrus polish and expensive quiet. The hallway lights were soft, designed to flatter faces that did not work for a living. Her sneakers squeaked against the tile, and she hated how loud that small sound felt, like an announcement that she did not belong. She passed the maintenance closet where she usually grabbed extra trash bags, and she almost laughed at the normalcy of it, at how her hands knew where everything was even when her life did not. An elevator chimed somewhere ahead, and voices drifted down the corridor, smooth and bright, the way people sounded when they were not counting dollars in their heads. She kept her eyes on the floor, on the thin line where marble met carpet, and she moved like she always did, small, efficient, easy to overlook. At the corner near the staff corridor, she paused. Through a half-open door, she saw a glimpse of the big boardroom level up on a monitor feed, part of the internal building display. It showed a room made of glass and pale wood, with a skyline behind it like a backdrop. A man stood near the window in a suit that looked like it had never been wrinkled by real weather. Graham Whitaker. Even on a security screen, he looked like someone who had never been told no without laughing. Beside him, Vanessa Pierce held a tablet like it was a judge's gavel. Nia did not hear everything, but the words that cut through were clear enough to sting. "We do not do loans for staff," Vanessa said, and her voice carried the same tone as a locked door. Firm, final, clean. Someone chuckled softly, as if the idea itself was entertainment. Nia's throat tightened. Behind her eyes, she saw her mother under fluorescent light, heard the steady beep that did not care about bank accounts. Nia pressed her palm against the wall, feeling the cool paint under her skin, and for 1 second, she let herself shake. Then she let it pass. She straightened her shoulders the way she had learned to do when people tried to fold her into herself. She checked the time on her phone. 9:42. The deposit deadline did not move for anyone. Nia slid her phone back into her pocket, took one slow breath that tasted like polished air, and stepped toward the elevator that led to the floors where decisions were made. Nia pressed the elevator button and watched the small light flick on like a dare. The doors slid open with a quiet hush, revealing an empty car lined with mirrored steel that made every flaw look sharper. Rainwater darkened the shoulders of her hoodie, and in the reflection, she looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong story. She stepped inside anyway. The elevator began to rise, smooth as a whisper, and the soft vibration under her shoes reminded her that the building had a heartbeat of its own. Numbers climbed above the door in steady order. 20, 30, 40. With each floor, the air seemed to change, less like a workplace and more like a showroom. Her phone buzzed against her thigh, and she did not take it out. She already knew what it would say. Low battery. No miracles. Nia opened her tote bag and pulled out the folded uniform, black and crisp, the silver Whitaker logo catching the elevator light like a warning. She hesitated only long enough to hear her mother's voice in her head, thin but steady, asking if she was okay. Then she moved. On the 44th floor, the doors opened to a quiet corridor and a restroom marked staff. The tile was spotless, the soap dispenser full, the mirror bright enough to show every tired hour in her eyes. Nia locked the door behind her and changed quickly, fingers practiced from hundreds of shifts. Hoodie off, uniform on, hair smoothed back. She splashed cold water on her face and let the sting sharpen her focus. On the counter, she laid out what little she had brought like evidence. A single sheet of paper she had printed at the public library earlier that week, a promissory note with clear terms and a repayment schedule, a pen, and a small velvet pouch that held her mother's ring. It was not flashy, just a thin band with a tiny stone that caught the light when you tilted it, the kind of thing Loretto wore even when the bills were late because dignity is sometimes the only jewelry people have. Nia slid the ring back into the pouch and tucked it into her pocket. She folded the paper once, then unfolded it again, forcing herself to keep it flat. She wanted it to look clean, serious, undeniable. The building was so quiet up here that she could hear her own breathing, and for a moment the silence felt like pressure on her chest. She stepped back into the hall. Down the corridor, soft music played from hidden speakers, something gentle meant to make wealthy people feel generous. A catering cart rolled past, pushed by a man in white gloves who nodded at her without looking twice. The smell of coffee and warm pastries drifted behind him, sweet and cruel. Nia followed the signs toward the executive level, her badge tapping lightly against her ribs with each step. At the next elevator bank, a security guard glanced at her and then at his screen. "Domestic services?" he asked, not unkind, just doubtful. Nia kept her voice steady. "Yes, sir. I am needed upstairs." The guard frowned at the monitor. "That floor is restricted." Nia did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply held out her badge and the folded paper like they belonged together. "It is an emergency," she said, and the word tasted like metal. The guard studied her for a second too long, as if deciding what kind of emergency counted when it belonged to someone like her. Then his radio chirped, and a woman's voice said, bright and impatient, "We have donors arriving in 10 minutes. Please keep the hallway clear." The guard sighed, swiped his card, and the elevator light turned green. 5 minutes, he warned. Then you go back down. Nia nodded once. 5 minutes was more time than the hospital had offered. The doors closed, and the elevator rose the last few floors into a world where the carpet felt like it had never been stepped on in anger. When the doors opened, Nia was met by a wash of warm light and quiet laughter. Ahead, double glass doors revealed the boardroom, all skyline. And polished wood, people gathered like they were waiting for a show. Vanessa Pierce stood near the table with her tablet, smiling the kind of smile that did not reach the eyes. Graham Whitaker stood by the window in his charcoal suit, speaking to 2 board members as if the rain outside was just decoration. Nia walked forward, each step measured, her heartbeat loud in her ears, the folded paper warm in her hand. Someone near the door started to turn, ready to dismiss her before she even opened her mouth, and Nia lifted her chin as if she had a right to be seen. Nia reached the glass doors just as a soft laugh rose from inside, the kind that came easy when nobody in the room was checking a bank balance. A junior assistant in a fitted dress turned first, eyes flicking down to Nia's uniform and then away, as if looking too long might make it real. Vanessa Pierce stepped in front of the doorway with the smooth speed of someone who had practiced blocking people without ever touching them. Her tablet was held flat against her palm like a rulebook. "You are on the wrong floor," Vanessa said, voice light enough to sound polite, sharp enough to cut. Nia kept both hands visible, the folded paper steady between her fingers. "I need 3 minutes with Mr. Whitaker," she replied. Her voice surprised even her, calm and level, like a glass set down carefully on a table. Vanessa's smile tightened. "Mr. Whitaker is preparing for an event. This is not an appropriate time." Behind Vanessa, the room was a gallery of polished wood and clean lines. A tray of sparkling water caught the ceiling lights and threw them back in bright shards. A board member with silver hair paused mid-sentence, watching with mild curiosity, as if this interruption was part of the evening's entertainment. Nia did not step back. She could still smell rain on her sleeves, and under it the faint chemical ghost of bleach from earlier, like a reminder of where she belonged in their eyes. "It is an emergency," Nia said. "My mother is in the hospital. I have until midnight." Vanessa's gaze slid to the paper, then to Nia's face, then past her as if searching for whoever should be responsible for keeping staff invisible. "We have a process," Vanessa replied. "You used the portal. It will be reviewed." Nia felt the hospital monitor beep in her memory, patient and indifferent. "It will be too late," she said. Vanessa's eyes hardened, and her voice lowered, still pleasant, still cruel. "Do not bring personal drama into a donor environment." The word donor hung in the air like a credential. Nia lifted her chin. "I am not here to cause a scene," she said. "I am here to prevent one from happening in my life." That was when Graham Whitaker turned from the window. The skyline behind him made a halo of city lights around his shoulders, and for a second, he looked like a man carved out of the same glass as the building. His gaze landed on Nia with the quick assessment of someone used to sorting people into categories. "Vanessa," he said, voice even, "what is this?" Vanessa answered without looking at Nia again. "A staff member," she said. "A request for an advance. I was handling it." Graham's eyes flicked to Nia's uniform logo, then to the folded paper, then back to her face. "You are supposed to be downstairs," he said. It was not a question. One of the board members chuckled softly. Another glanced at his watch. The catering manager froze near the wall, hands hovering over a tray, pretending to be a statue. Nia took one step forward, stopping just inside the doorway, so nobody could say she crossed a line she had not been invited to cross. "Mr. Whitaker," she began, "I am asking for a small loan." The word loan sounded strange in this room, like a hymn sung in an elevator. Graham's expression did not change, but the air did. It tightened, as if the building itself disapproved. "A loan," he repeated, and there was a faint edge now, not anger, but offense. From me. Vanessa made a small sound, half laugh, half warning. This is not how things work, she said, louder, for the board members, for the room, for the invisible audience that always existed around men like Graham. Graham's gaze sharpened. You understand, he said, that this is not a charity line. We have rules. We have structure. You cannot just walk into a boardroom because you have a story. His eyes swept over her like she was a smudge on glass. People like you always think there is an exception waiting for you if you make it emotional. The boardroom went so quiet that even the rain against the window seemed to pause. Nia felt the heat rise behind her eyes, but she did not blink it into tears. She looked straight at him, paper still steady in her hand, and said, carefully, I am not asking for a handout. I am offering terms. Vanessa's smile vanished. Security, she said, reaching for her phone. Please escort her out. Nia did not flinch when Vanessa said security, but her stomach tightened anyway, the way it did when she heard the hospital monitor change rhythm for a second before settling back into its steady beep. She could feel every eye in the boardroom land on her uniform like it was a stain, not a badge. The rain pressed against the glass behind Graham Whitaker, turning the skyline into a smear of light, and for a moment the whole room looked like a beautiful place where nothing human was allowed to happen. Nia kept her hands in front of her, palms open, the folded paper between her fingers. I am not here to beg, she said, and her voice stayed calm even as her throat burned. I am here to borrow. Graham's mouth tightened as if the word offended him. You understand what you are doing, he said. You are interrupting a board meeting. Nia nodded once. Yes, sir, she answered. I do. Vanessa stepped half a pace closer, lowering her voice like a threat wrapped in etiquette. You are about to lose your job, she said. Nia looked at Vanessa, then at Graham. I can find another job, she replied. I cannot find another mother. The room went even quieter, the kind of quiet that made the soft music from the hidden speakers sound like a mistake. The doors behind Nia opened again with a gentle hush, and two security officers appeared in dark uniforms, hands clasped in front of them, faces neutral. They did not rush, but their presence widened the space between Nia and everyone else, like an invisible line was being painted around her. Vanessa lifted her chin. Please escort her out, she said, as if ordering a coat check. One of the officers took a step forward. Nia raised her hand slightly, not to stop him, just to ask for one breath of time. Before I go, she said, turning back to Graham, please look at this. Graham did not move. His eyes stayed on her like she was a problem he could solve by ignoring. I do not take financial requests from employees, he said. That is what human resources is for. Nia's fingers loosened, and she unfolded the paper with slow care, smoothing it between her hands the way she smoothed sheets on a bed that was not hers. She walked to the edge of the table and laid the page down without sliding it, without pushing it toward him like a plea. Just placed, clean and still. The printed text looked small against the expanse of polished wood. It is a promissory note, she said. $3,200. Repaid in 16 weekly payments. Graham's gaze flicked to the paper despite himself. Vanessa scoffed softly. This is absurd, she murmured. Nia did not look at her. I listed an interest rate, Nia continued, steady as the rain. It is fair. It is higher than a bank would give me, because I am not a bank customer to them. But it is lower than a payday lender, because I am not asking you to profit from my fear. One of the board members shifted in his chair, uncomfortable in a new way. Graham's eyes stayed on the page now, reading without wanting to be seen reading. Nia reached into her pocket and pulled out the small velvet pouch. Her fingers hesitated for a heartbeat. Then she opened it and let the ring rest on her palm. Under the boardroom lights, the tiny stone caught a thin spark, modest but stubborn. This is collateral, she said. It is my mother's. It is the only thing she has that is worth anything besides her name. Vanessa's expression hardened. You cannot bring personal items into this room, she snapped, as if the ring might contaminate the table. Nia closed her fist gently around it. I am not asking for kindness, she said, looking at Graham. I am asking for a contract. Graham's jaw flexed. He glanced at the security officers, then at the board members, then back to Nia, like he was measuring the cost of letting her exist in front of them for another 10 seconds. Why do you think you deserve this? He asked, voice low. Nia held his gaze. Because I will pay it back, she said. And because tonight is the difference between life continuing and life stopping. The word stopping hung in the air, not dramatic, just true. One of the security officers cleared his throat softly, as if reminding them time was moving. Vanessa leaned toward Graham, whispering, "Do not encourage this." Graham did not answer her. His eyes stayed on the promissory note, and for the first time since Nia walked in, his expression looked less like control and more like something he could not quite name. "Please escort her out," Vanessa repeated, and the words landed with the soft finality of a door clicking shut. One of the security officers stepped closer, not aggressive, just certain, and Nia felt the room lean toward its familiar ending, where people like her disappeared and the polished table stayed spotless. Graham Whitaker did not look at the officers. His eyes stayed on the promissory note, then rose to her face as if he was trying to decide whether she was brave or simply foolish. "You are making this difficult," he said, voice low enough that it sounded almost private. "You cannot come in here and negotiate with my name." Nia held the velvet pouch in her fist, the ring pressing a small circle into her palm, a tiny pain that kept her anchored. Outside the windows, rain streaked down the glass in thin lines, like the city itself was writing something nobody in this room wanted to read. Nia took one slow breath. The air tasted expensive, like citrus and coffee, but underneath she could still sense the wet asphalt she had walked through to get here, the real world clinging to her clothes. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, and the syllables came out steady. "I did not come here because I think your money makes you a god. I came here because time does not care who you are." Vanessa made a sharp little sound, impatient. "Enough," she said. The security officer lifted his hand slightly, waiting for Nia to move. Nia did not move. She looked at Graham the way she looked at a locked hospital door, not with anger, but with determination that had nowhere else to go. "You asked why I think I deserve this," Nia said. "I think you should know who my mother is before you decide what kind of man you want to be in the next 5 minutes. Graham's eyebrows drew together. "I know who your mother is," he said, and there was a faint contempt in it, the assumption that her mother was only ever a background character in someone else's life. "She is your mother." Nia nodded once. "Her name is Loretta Carter," she said, and she watched his eyes for any flicker. There was none. Not yet. Vanessa's mouth tightened. "We do not need family introductions," she said. "We need you out of this room." Nia kept her gaze on Graham. "Loretta Carter used to work nights at St. Mercy," she continued, careful with every word. "Not as a donor. Not as a board member. As staff." Graham's jaw flexed, as if the hospital name was familiar in a way he did not want to admit. "Many people work there," he said. "That does not make them my concern." Nia's voice stayed calm, but something in it sharpened like a blade made of truth, not threat. "On October 17th, 2006, she said, your mother, Evelyn Whitaker, was brought into the emergency room after the gala. It was raining like this." The room seemed to inhale. One of the board members shifted, suddenly interested in his water glass. Vanessa froze with her phone half raised, the screen reflecting in her eyes. Graham's posture changed by a fraction, the way a man changes when a stranger speaks a name that should be safe inside his own memory. "Do not say my mother's name," he said quietly, and now there was no contempt, only warning and something underneath it that sounded like fear. Nia did not blink. "My mother was the one assigned to her bay," Nia said. "Your father was not there yet. You were there." Graham's lips parted as if to deny it, but no sound came out. Nia felt the room tilt, felt the air go thin. She took a step closer to the table, not crossing into his space, just closing the distance that had been built to keep people like her far away. "You were 17, she said. "You had on a tuxedo jacket that was too big in the shoulders, and you kept rubbing your thumb against the inside seam like you were trying to erase yourself." Graham's face went still, the way faces go still in old photographs. Nia's fingers loosened around the pouch, and she let the ring rest against her skin again, steadying her. "You told my mother you could not breathe," she said softly. "You said, 'I cannot do this without her.' And my mother put her hand on your wrist and made you look at her, and she said, 'Count to 4, Gray. Then count to 4 again. Kindness is not weakness. It is how you survive.'" The nickname hit the room like a dropped glass, except nothing shattered, because nobody moved. Graham Whitaker stared at Nia as if the glass walls had vanished, and he was suddenly standing in a different place, A different night. Rain on the windows. A woman's voice in the bright hospital light. His throat worked once. His mouth opened. No words came. Vanessa's tablet slipped a fraction in her grip, and the soft music in the ceiling sounded far away, like it had lost permission to exist. Graham Whitaker stared at Nia as if she had reached through the glass and touched something he kept locked behind it. The board members did not speak. The security officers did not move. Even Vanessa Pierce seemed to forget to breathe for one careful second. Her polished composure caught on the name Evelyn like a thread on a sharp corner. Graham's fingers tightened around the edge of the table, knuckles paling against the dark wood. His eyes flicked to the ring in Nia's hand, then back to her face, like he was looking for proof that she was lying and finding none. "That is not possible," he said, but his voice did not carry conviction, only reflex. Nia kept her shoulders squared, her hands steady, the promissory note still lying flat on the table like a quiet dare. "It happened," she replied. "I did not come here to win a memory contest. I came here because my mother is in a bed right now and the hospital needs a deposit before midnight." The word midnight made the room feel smaller, as if time had stepped into the doorway too. Vanessa recovered first, her smile returning in a sharper shape. "This is manipulation," she said, turning slightly so the board members could see her leadership. "She is reciting a story to provoke sympathy. We have donors arriving. We cannot indulge this." Graham did not look at Vanessa. His gaze stayed on Nia, and for the first time his expression held something raw, like an old bruise pressed without warning. "What is your mother's date of birth?" he asked suddenly, as if details could save him from the feeling in his chest. Nia answered without hesitation. Graham's jaw worked. He inhaled, slow, controlled, the same way Nia had described. The same count to 4 he had forgotten belonged to him. He turned his head slightly toward the security officers. "Stand down," he said. The words were calm, but they carried weight. One officer blinked, then stepped back, hands returning to a neutral clasp. Vanessa's eyes widened a fraction. "Graham," she warned, using his first name like a leash. Graham finally looked at her, and the temperature in his stare could have cooled steel. "Clear the room," he said to Vanessa, not loud, not dramatic, just certain. "Tell the board we will reconvene after the photo call." A board member started to protest, then swallowed it when Graham's gaze did not soften. Chairs slid back. Water glasses were gathered. Laughter did not return. The room emptied with polite confusion, the kind people wore when they wanted to pretend they were not witnessing something real. When the last person left, Graham walked to the glass doors and closed them himself. The soft click sounded too final. He turned back to Nia. "Wait here," he said, and he pointed to a leather chair near the wall, the kind meant for guests who never stayed long. Nia did not sit. She could not afford comfort right now. "I do not have time for this to become nothing," she said. Graham's eyes dropped to the promissory note again. "You have time," he replied, but it sounded like he was trying to convince himself. He stepped out through a side door into an executive corridor where the carpet muffled urgency. His office was a box of quiet with a view that made the city look small. He did not sit behind his desk. He went straight to a built-in cabinet and opened a drawer filled with old files, the kind he never touched because Vanessa said everything was digital now. He found a thin folder labeled Evelyn Whitaker, St. Mercy, 2006. His hands paused over it. Rain ticked softly against the window. He pulled the folder out and opened it, papers sliding under his fingertips with a dry whisper. A photocopied incident report stared up at him in black ink. Near the bottom, in a section labeled Staff on Duty, a name was typed cleanly, plain as truth, Loretta Carter. Graham's eyes stayed on the typed name as if it might vanish if he blinked. Loretta Carter. Plain ink on plain paper, filed under a woman whose last name built towers. He turned the page with a careful thumb, and the paper made a dry whisper that sounded too loud in the quiet. The report was clinical, tidy, full of measured language that pretended people were not terrified. Time of arrival, observations, disposition, and then, in the corner of a supplemental note, a line that did not belong to medicine at all. Staff member Loretta Carter remained with family until father arrived. Assisted minor son with breathing technique. Graham's chest tightened. Not pain, not sickness, something older, the feeling of being 17 and suddenly small in a room too bright. He could smell it again, that sharp hospital scent, antiseptic and warm plastic. The way the lights made everyone look tired even when they were trying to be strong. He remembered his own fingers rubbing a seam, the frantic need to do something with his hands. Count to 4, Gray. Then count to 4 again. He had not heard that nickname in years. He had not let himself. His gaze dropped to the next page, a foundation memo printed on letterhead, so expensive it looked arrogant. Subject: Immediate support for St. Mercy Emergency Department. Donor recognition withheld per family request. Amount: $50,000. In smaller text, additional staff recognition stipend recommended for Loretta Carter, $5,000, paid directly due to financial hardship noted by supervisor. At the bottom was a signature line with his father's name stamped and a second line labeled Finance Review. That line was filled with initials that made his stomach go cold. VP. Not a signature, not a name, just 2 neat letters beside a date from years later, when records were migrated and old promises were either honored or buried. Approved, it said. Processed, it said. Closed, it said. Graham stared at those letters until his vision blurred at the edges. Then he stood so fast his chair rolled back an inch, silent on the thick carpet. Outside his office window, the rain kept sliding down the glass like it had somewhere to go. He did not. He opened another drawer and pulled out a slim address book he had not touched in years, the kind his assistant insisted on keeping because technology failed and paper did not lie. He found a name, a number, and pressed call before he could talk himself out of it. It rang twice. James Holloway. A man answered, voice older than Graham remembered, still steady. It is Graham, Graham said, and the words sounded strange in his own mouth, like he was using a version of himself he had misplaced. I need you to tell me something. Do you remember the night my mother went to St. Mercy after the gala in 2006? There was a pause, soft and long. Yes, James said. I remember. Graham's throat tightened. Do you remember a staff member named Loretta Carter? Another pause. I remember her, James replied. She stayed with you. She kept you calm when you could not look at the monitors. Graham closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them again to the folder, to the initials, to the word processed. Was there a payment? Graham asked. A recognition stipend for her. James exhaled. There was supposed to be, he said. Your father mentioned it. Then the office said it was handled. Later, when I asked, they told me not to worry about it. Graham's fingers tightened around the phone until the edges pressed into his skin. In the other room, beyond his closed door, he could almost feel Nia standing in that leather chair she refused to sit in, her mother's ring pressing into her palm, her time running out in minutes instead of years. Graham opened his office door and stepped back into the executive corridor. The soft music from the gala prep drifted down the hall like a lie. Nia looked up immediately, eyes bright with held-back panic, face steady anyway. What is happening? She asked, and her voice did not shake, but the question did. Graham held the folder against his side as if it weighed more than paper. He looked at her, really looked, and the polished distance he wore like a suit felt suddenly too tight. Where is your mother? He asked. Which hospital? What is the billing number? Nia swallowed. St. Mercy, she said. Emergency admissions. Deposit due before midnight. Graham nodded once, already pulling his phone out, and as he did, his eyes flicked past her. Shoulder to the hallway where Vanessa Pierce was walking toward them, her smile back in place like a mask, her tablet held close, her heels quiet on the carpet, as if she had never made a mistake in her life. Graham's thumb hovered over his phone screen. The hospital number Nia had just spoken sitting there like a lifeline and a thread at the same time. The executive corridor smelled faintly of citrus polish and expensive air, but underneath it, he could still taste the stale paper of the old folder pressed against his ribs, the kind of paper that never forgot. Nia stood a few feet away, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles looked lighter than her skin, her eyes fixed on his face, as if the next breath he took would decide whether her world stayed intact. The soft click of heels approached, measured and confident, and Vanessa Pierce appeared at the end of the hallway with her tablet held against her chest like a shield. Her smile was perfectly placed, the same smile she wore for donors, for cameras, for anyone who needed to believe in order. There you are, Vanessa said, tone bright, as if she had found a misplaced item rather than a human crisis. Her eyes flicked to Nia, then away, dismissing her with the casual efficiency of a filing system. The photographer is setting up. The board is asking why the room was cleared. We have guests arriving in 8 minutes. Graham did not answer her greeting. He looked at Vanessa the way he looked at the initials in the folder, and something in his gaze made her pause. St. Mercy Billing, he said, reading the number aloud as he pressed call. Vanessa's smile sharpened. Graham, she said softly, stepping closer, lowering her voice as if she was saving him from himself. This is not appropriate. If you want to make a donation, we can route it through the foundation after the gala. Tomorrow morning. There are procedures. There is compliance. The phone rang once in Graham's ear, and in that single ring he heard a different sound. The steady beep Nia carried with her like a shadow. He watched Vanessa's mouth form the word tomorrow, and he remembered how easily tomorrow had swallowed $5,000 mint for Loretta Carter. He did not hang up. He lifted his free hand, palm facing Vanessa in a quiet stop. Not tomorrow, he said. The line clicked, and a recorded voice began listing options, calm and cheerful in the way bureaucracy always sounded before it hurt someone. Thank you for calling St. Mercy Hospital Billing. Graham pressed the keypad, choosing the fastest path like a man who finally understood what minutes cost. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, but she kept her posture smooth, her expression composed enough to be photographed. You are letting her corner you, she murmured. This is a staff boundary issue. If you give money to one employee, you will have a line outside your door. You will look weak. Nia flinched at the word weak, not because it was new, but because it was familiar, a word people used when they wanted to justify being cruel. Graham's gaze did not leave Vanessa. Weak, he repeated, and his voice held no heat, only clarity. My mother was in a hospital bed once. I was weak. A woman named Loretta Carter did not punish me for it. Vanessa's jaw tightened. We are talking about risk, she said. Public perception. The board. A human voice answered on the phone, slightly tired, slightly rushed, the voice of someone who had said the same sentences all day. Billing, this is Marisol. How may I help you? Graham's voice changed when he spoke to her, less polished, more direct. I am authorizing a deposit payment for patient Loretta Carter, he said. I will provide my information now. Process it immediately. Nia's eyes widened, and for the first time all night, her breath sounded like it might turn into something other than panic. Vanessa took a sharp step forward. Graham, she hissed, you cannot. Graham covered the phone's microphone with his hand and looked at Vanessa with a stillness that felt like a locked door in the opposite direction. You initialed an approval for Loretta Carter years ago, he said quietly. Your initials are on the finance review. Tell me where that money went. Vanessa's smile flickered, a brief malfunction. Then it snapped back into place, thinner now. You are misreading an old document, she said. We can discuss it after the gala. Graham removed his hand from the phone, gave Marisol the necessary information with steady precision, and then, without taking his eyes off Vanessa, added one more sentence that made the corridor feel colder than the rain outside. No, Vanessa. We are discussing it now. Vanessa Pierce held her smile in place, but it looked like it cost her effort now, the way a person holds a door shut when they know something is pushing from the other side. Graham, you are letting an employee corner you in a hallway, she said, keeping her voice soft, donor-friendly, as if the cameras could hear through walls. This is not compassion. This is risk. Graham kept the phone to his ear, listening as Marisol from billing spoke in the background, her words muffled by distance and fluorescent noise. Nia stood very still, eyes fixed on Graham's face, as if she could pull the seconds into order by sheer focus. Her fingers were clasped at her waist, and she could feel her mother's ring in her pocket, warm from her skin, heavy with everything she could not afford to lose. Marisol's voice sharpened briefly on the line, then steadied. Payment authorized and processed, she said. Your confirmation number is... Graham repeated the number out loud, slow and precise, then ended the call. The hallway was so quiet afterward that the soft music from the gala prep sounded wrong, like a song playing during a funeral. Nia's shoulders dropped by a fraction, the first crack in her control, and she inhaled as if she had been underwater. Thank you, she said, and the words were not dramatic, just real. Vanessa's eyes flicked to Nia, then back to Graham. You have now created a precedent, Vanessa said. Every staff member with a sob story will think the boardroom is a vending machine. Nia flinched at sob story, but she did not look away. She lifted her chin and spoke before Graham could answer, her voice calm in a way that made the insult feel small. I did not come here to make myself a habit, Nia said. I came here because my mother needed a bed tonight. That is all. Vanessa's mouth tightened. Then you should be grateful and leave, she replied, already reaching for her tablet, as if to erase the moment. Graham did not move. The old folder was still tucked against his side, and he could feel the sharp edge of paper through his suit like a reminder that time could steal from people quietly for years. Where did the recognition stipend go? He asked Vanessa again, voice low, steady. The way a man sounds when he is done being distracted. Vanessa gave a practiced exhale. It was processed into operating expenses, she said. The foundation supports the hospital broadly. Your father did not want individual payouts to become liabilities. Graham's eyes narrowed. That is not what the memo says, he replied. Vanessa's smile returned, colder. The memo is old. The board is current. The donors are arriving. The photographer is waiting. You can either walk out there as a leader, or you can stand here interrogating in administrative detail while the cameras capture your absence. She leaned in slightly, just enough for her perfume to reach him, crisp and expensive. You built this image, she whispered. Do not let her break it. Nia heard the word her like a finger pointed at her chest, and for one heartbeat she imagined what it would feel like to speak loudly, to step into the lobby where the cameras were, to let the truth spill out where it could not be tucked back into a folder. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket, its screen probably dim and dying, as if even the battery was warning her not to waste power on revenge. She looked at Graham, then at Vanessa, and she made a choice that tasted like rain and iron and restraint. Mr. Whitaker, Nia said quietly, I do not want your mother to become a headline, and I do not want my mother to become one either. Vanessa's eyes flashed. Do not act noble, she snapped, but Nia did not rise to it. Nia kept her gaze on Graham. If the deposit is paid, I will go back to the hospital, she continued. I will take care of her. I will come back to work. If you want me to sign the note, I will sign it. I will pay you back because I do not want this to be charity and I do not want it to be a weapon. The words landed softly, but they carried weight because they did not ask for anyone to lose. Graham stared at her, and something in his expression shifted, as if he had been waiting his whole life to meet a kind of strength that did not look like control. He turned to Vanessa, and his voice was calm in a way that made her posture stiffen. Bring me the full foundation ledger for that year, he said. Bring me every payment tied to St. Mercy, every review note, every approval initial, and call compliance. Now, Vanessa's smile cracked at the edges. You cannot do this before the gala, she said, and her voice finally sounded sharp, human, afraid. Graham did not blink. Watch me, he replied. Behind them, an assistant's voice drifted down the corridor, bright and urgent. Mr. Whitaker, they are ready for you. Graham did not answer the assistant. He looked at Nia one more time and said, softer, go to your mother. Nia nodded, and as she turned toward the elevator, the hallway lights caught the moisture in her eyes, not tears falling, just the shine of someone who held herself together long enough to keep love alive. Nia rode the elevator down with her hands clenched around her tote bag straps, listening to the soft glide of cables and the distant murmur of gala prep fading above her like a dream she did not have time to interpret. The mirrored wall showed her uniform in crisp black, the silver Whitaker logo sitting over her heart like a question. Her phone buzzed, the screen dim and trembling on its last percent, and when she pulled it out she saw a text from an unknown number with St. Mercy at the top. Deposit received. Patient account secured. Relief did not feel like fireworks. It felt like her lungs finally remembering they were allowed to fill. She swallowed hard, tucked the phone away, and stepped out into the service corridor where the air smelled less like perfume and more like honest work. Outside, the rain hit her face again, cold and real, and she walked fast to the bus stop, counting blocks the way her mother taught her to count breaths. 1, 2, 3, 4, because moving was the only prayer that made sense right now. Above her, Whitaker Tower stayed lit and untouchable, but for the first time it did not feel like a wall. It felt like a place where a crack had opened. On the executive floor, Graham did not follow the music. He followed the paper. He walked back into his office and dropped the folder on his desk with a dull thud, then called compliance and demanded a live pull of every foundation disbursement tied to St. Mercy for the year after his mother's. Hospitalization. His assistant arrived with a tablet and a pale face, whispering that donors were already in the lobby, that the photographer was asking for him by name. That Vanessa Pierce was insisting this was a misunderstanding. Graham did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He simply said, "Bring her to my office," and the sentence landed like a lock clicking. Vanessa entered 10 minutes later with her posture perfect and her smile freshly repaired, carrying a folder of gala talking points as if words could cover numbers. "You are about to embarrass yourself," she said, stepping closer, lowering her tone into something meant to sound protective. "The board will not forgive a public spiral." Graham slid a printed ledger across the desk, the pages still warm from the printer, and tapped a highlighted line with his finger. "Tell me why the recognition stipend for Loretta Carter was approved and never paid," he said. Vanessa glanced at the paper, then looked back up as if the ink was beneath her. "It was allocated," she replied. "In-kind support. Administrative routing." Graham turned another page, then another, each one marked with clean columns and quiet theft. "Tell me why St. Mercy received a consulting payment to a company that does not exist," he said, and he watched her eyes flick to the top corner where the company name sat, bland and forgettable, and then to the line at the bottom where the authorized reviewer initials appeared. VP Vanessa's throat tightened. "Graham," she began, but her voice did not have its smooth edge anymore. It had a crack. "You are reading internal documents without context." Graham leaned back in his chair, not relaxed, just steady, and said, "I have context now. I have a woman in my hallway offering a promissory note because someone decided $5,000 was disposable. I have my mother's hospital record, and I have your initials." Vanessa's smile tried to return and failed halfway. "Everything I did was for the foundation," she said, words coming faster. "For your image. For efficiency. For protecting you from chaos." Graham's gaze did not soften. "You did not protect me," he said quietly. "You protected a story." He pressed one more document forward, an email trail flagged by compliance with timestamps and attachments, and Vanessa's fingers hovered over it without touching, like touching would make it real. Graham stood, walked to the window, and watched rain trace lines down the glass, then turned back with a calm that felt final. "Your employment is terminated effective immediately," he said. "You will turn over your access, and you will cooperate with the audit. Tonight." Vanessa's face went pale. "You cannot do this on gala night," she whispered, and for the first time she sounded like Nia had sounded, not powerful, just human and afraid of consequences. Graham looked at the clock. 10:21. "Watch me," he said again, softer now, not as a threat, as a decision. Then he picked up his phone and called the lobby, telling them the photo call was canceled, that donors would be thanked and redirected to the program staff, and that the foundation would issue a corrected statement in the morning. The city kept shining below like nothing had changed, but in the quiet of his office, Graham Whitaker finally understood the difference between looking generous and being decent. Nia pushed through the sliding doors of St. Mercy with rain still clinging to her hair, the hospital air meeting her like a wall of disinfectant and warm plastic. The lobby clock glowed 11:07 p.m., and the numbers felt like they were counting her heartbeat out loud. She moved past the vending machines and the rows of hard chairs where families sat folded into themselves, and every step sounded too loud against the polished floor. When she reached the admissions desk, the clerk glanced at the screen and nodded once, not smiling, not unkind, just relieved to deliver a sentence that did not hurt. "Deposit is received. You are secured," she said. Nia thanked her, and the gratitude caught in her throat like a swallowed sob, because relief did not come as joy. It came as permission to keep going. In the hallway outside the emergency base, Dr. Samuel Reed met her with tired eyes and a gentler voice than before. "We are moving forward," he said. "You did what you needed to do." Nia nodded and walked to her mother's curtain. Loretta lay under a thin blanket, oxygen line in place, her face softer in sleep, the stubborn warmth still there even with exhaustion pulled across it. The monitor beeped steady, 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 and for the first time all night the sound felt like a promise instead of a warning. Nia sat in the chair and held her mother's hand, feeling the cool skin and the faint squeeze when Loretta drifted toward waking. "Baby," Loretta murmured, eyes barely open. "You okay?" Nia swallowed and smiled. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered, Because her mother always liked that. Because dignity had habits. We are okay. Outside the curtain, footsteps approached, slower than the hurried pace of nurses, measured but uncertain, like someone learning how to enter a room without owning it. Nia looked up and saw Graham Whitaker standing there in a dark coat without a logo, hair slightly damp from the rain, no entourage, no camera glow. He held a plain manila envelope in both hands, gripping it like it was heavier than it should be. For a second he did not speak, as if he was listening to the beeping, letting it tell him what money could not. Then he stepped closer, stopping at the edge of the curtain like he understood there were lines you did not cross without invitation. "Ms. Carter," he said quietly. "Nia." She stood halfway, protective by instinct, then remembered she did not need to fight in this room. "Mr. Whitaker," she answered, voice low. Graham looked at Loretta, then back to Nia, and his throat worked once before words came out. "The deposit is paid, and it will stay paid," he said. "There will be no repayment plan, and no payroll deduction, and no promissory note." Nia's fingers tightened around her mother's hand. "I offered terms," she said, not defiant, just steady. "I do not want to owe something I cannot name." Graham nodded once, like he respected that. "Then call it what it is," he replied. "A debt I did not pay when I was 17. A debt my organization avoided paying when it mattered. I found records tonight. I found a promise that was supposed to reach your mother and did not." He held out the envelope, careful, like offering something fragile. Inside is a letter from the foundation correcting the record and a payment that should have been made years ago, plus coverage for medical expenses that are already on the account. It will not be public. It will not be used for an image. Nia did not take the envelope immediately. She looked at him, searching for the polished distance she had met in the boardroom, and finding instead a man who looked tired in a real way. "Is Vanessa Pierce still employed?" Nia asked, not for revenge, for truth. Graham's gaze dropped for a moment. "No," he said. "There is an audit. There will be accountability. I will not let decency be optional in my name again." Loretta stirred, eyes opening wider now, and her gaze landed on Graham with a faint frown of recognition that came from somewhere deep. "Gray," she rasped, the nickname worn soft by time. Graham went still, as if the sound had reached into him and turned a lock. He stepped closer to the bed and lowered his voice to the level of prayer. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Loretta blinked, then gave the smallest smile. "Count," she whispered. Graham inhaled, slow, and nodded like a student who finally understood the lesson. Nia felt her anger, her fear, her pride all pressed together in her chest, and she chose the one that kept the room warm. She took the envelope and set it on the chair, then placed her free hand lightly on Graham's wrist for a second, not forgiveness like a performance, just a human anchor. "Do not waste this," she said. Graham looked at her hand, then at her face, and his eyes shone under the fluorescent light without spilling. Outside the curtain, the hospital kept moving, carts rolling, shoes squeaking, rain tapping the windows. But inside the small space around Loretta's bed, there was only breath and the steady beep and a quiet kind of power that did not need anyone to clap.